Welcome to Bled Talk, where language barriers are shattered and aspirations take flight. I'm your host, Samuel Bledsoe, here to ignite your English journey. Each week, join us for captivating conversations between native speakers, unraveling the secrets of vocabulary and expressions through authentic stories and natural dialogue. Let's empower your language skills and embrace the power of communication. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Bled Talk. Today, we are with Anne. She is famously known as Lagringabaiana on Instagram. I found her after some time, and I love her content. So if you guys ever want to go and watch those and interact, watch her lives as well, those are all really good. But it's wonderful. She has a lot of good things, and we were talking before we started to record, and we were having a great conversation. So we figured we'll share the rest of our you guys. But and I wanted to ask you, like, how did it all start? How did you become Lagringabaiana?
So I think I've been teaching English in some platforms, some physical, some online, since like 2016, I want to say. But I think I've always loved the idea of social media. I've posted on YouTube for like a million years. There's like nobody on there, but it was like travel things for a while. And then when I started teaching online, I started wanting to make videos for people about kind of what you do, actually. Just yours are like much more succinct and much more like put together. And I would do these long videos on YouTube, and it just wasn't generating as much attention. But I don't like a lot of text format stuff. So when Instagram came up with Reels and they started kind of getting popularity, I was like, oh, let me just make some.
Let me hop on the train.
Let me just, I like videos. I have ADHD, so my attention short videos like prime for me. And I made a few and they were fine. They didn't get too much attention, but I think I started making videos with my husband with comparisons, and then also I started making videos about Baiano slang specifically. So most of my Portuguese experience is here in Bahia, and I kind of just started talking about words and phrases that I love in Portuguese, and people seem to enjoy an American perspective on it. But words like oosh and like né and I don't know, stuff like that. Away. Things like that. It was fun. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Started doing that, and then people wanted my language stuff because I also teach online. So I was like, hey, let's make some educational ones, some funny ones. And people liked it. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And we were talking before, you said you had taught English in Spain before, right? So did you learn Spanish while you were there as well? Or
I would say I got better at it. My Spanish was, I started when I was 12, like normal, like Midwestern high school, middle school actually. And it was pretty general, I would say, but it was good. I did all 6 years. I did like 7th grade till senior year was all Spanish class. So I came from Spanish, was a very academic Spanish. So it's like, memorizing the verb forms and vocabulary and stuff. But when I moved to Spain the first time, that was in college for like the semester. They're like, oh my God, I went to Spain. It was incredible. It changed my life. Like that vibe for the semester. Yeah. And then I liked it so much that I went back after that. So I was like, after graduation, I did 2 years in Spain teaching. Yeah.
Would you say that Spanish helped you learn or was it more of a hurdle? That's something that happens to a lot of people, because I have a lot of friends who are from Mexico, and they came to São Paulo when I lived there, and I think they had a lot more difficult time learning Portuguese than the Americans did with Portuguese, because a lot of times when people are from the U.S., but Portuguese is it's a whole different thing. It's a lot more difficult. And all of those things. Whereas like with Spanish, it's so similar that I think sometimes we can get confused, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I think it really depends on the person, because for me, So I say this about my Portuguese. When I speak in Portuguese, people have an understanding. They think that I'm like like so good at it. But in reality, I'm a guessing game most of the time with a very strong Spanish influence because I had to learn Spanish the way that I did. It's like the people that learned English in school. It's like I go, you go, he,
Right.
she, it goes. I did that all with Spanish. And so what it did is it gave me structure for how a Romance language works. And I
Yep.
was able to basically take those like bones, that logic, and apply it to Portuguese. But like, I guess in the middle, I was very lucky because when I lived in Spain, I lived in Galicia, if you know it. It's like that chunk above Portugal.
Oh,
It's a little
okay.
thing. And there they speak Galician, actually. They speak Spanish as well, but they speak Galician, which is literally like Spanish and Portuguese put together. So became before Spanish and Portuguese. They had Galician first and then it divvied. And so we see a lot of sounds and rules in Galician that I actually could apply to Portuguese. So that helped me a lot as well. It just kind of was like, oh, okay, so yo is like eu, and falo in Portuguese is like hablo in Spanish, and you started to see these connections. So my head it helped
Yeah.
because I feel like if I had to learn Portuguese just from English, it would have taken me longer, definitely.
It takes a long time. It's one
Yeah.
it's one of those things that I also think what's important is the people who are around you.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because whenever I came to Brazil for the first time, I didn't speak any Portuguese. I didn't know it, didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I took Spanish, like you said, until high school, and in high school I took French, and I
Oh.
understood some of what I learned in French. But the main reason I took French was because most guys didn't take French, so there was a lot of girls in class. So
I
I
have friends that did that too. They were like, oh, I took French because chicks.
I took French class because there was a lot of girls in French class,
And
and I was right. I was like the only guy out of like 30 people in class.
wow.
So it was fun.
It's the language of love.
Exactly. So I don't know how much I learned of French, but it started to make a lot more sense after I learned Portuguese.
Yeah.
But I came to Brazil, and some of my friends, they were put with Brazilians who knew how to speak English, so they kind of had that conversation between them. But the guy that I was put with did not speak English. He was from the Northeast, and we were put in a place outside of São Paulo. So there was no English that happened there. The guy didn't speak English, and I was there alone. I was by myself. And I would say that it was a very big struggle in the beginning. But once you learn how to ask what something is, right, you're like, okay, so, and then after that, then you just start getting the answers that you need. But I learned fast that because we had a meeting after like a month that we were out doing our thing, and we all came together, and my friends that were Americans, they didn't really have a lot of Portuguese because they were speaking in English with other people, but I did because I had no other choice. It was either be quiet or speak Portuguese, and so I'm not a quiet person, and so I wanted
Mine was really similar in that way too. So
I wanted to talk, and I think also just depending on how long you put into learning, and I also think that everybody's different as well. You know, some people,
absolutely,
especially with teaching English, I've learned that some people are just really good at learning languages, and some people are not. But that's okay. It doesn't mean you can't learn. It just means that sometimes it might take a little bit longer for some people than others. And the people who didn't do very well, like who don't learn very fast in English, usually are pretty fast in something else, whether it be math or
exactly
or something else. You know, everybody has their own gifts, and sometimes language isn't that gift, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible.
No. Well, and I think it's a very interesting thing as well when we look at language learning in particular. I think one of the largest benefits I notice is when you've been exposed to that language for a long time. That does not mean active learning. It means a lot of people in Brazil have heard English in some way on television or through Hollywood or something. So like they know the sounds, but it's making the sense of the sounds that can be very, very complicated, because we have this, like my husband and I do this every freaking day. Like I'll say a word in English because I talk at him in English a lot and he answers me in Portuguese. And just because I want to train his ears, I say, I want to train your ears. And he'll be like, oh, this word, like this word. And in my head, they have like, they're not related at all.
Right.
But when I think about it in a Portuguese speaker's brain, I'm like, oh, those do sound the same, right? I was like, today, I was talking to somebody about batter versus butter. And it's just very subtle, but so you start to see the connections that people have. And so when they get used to those sounds, it can help.
Well,
But
I agree with that. That reminded me of something. There's a tongue twister, and it's called Betty Botter bought some butter.
Yeah, I love that one.
It's a good one, and I I'm like, yeah, it is difficult, but then sometimes I think as natives we don't really understand why it's so difficult. And then, for example, I had a student the other day. I said worse, and she thought I said horse, and I was like, those do not sound anything similar at all. Like they don't. To me, they don't sound anything alike. And for her, they were identical. And I was like, no way. It's like the difference between bed and bad. For us, bed, if you say bed, I know exactly. Bed is bed. Bad is bad. But bed and bad to them is the same sound.
Well, it's the divisions when you start to look at the International Phonetics alphabet. That's why I like to use it so often, is because we are able to see symbols that represent the specific funky sound. Yeah. Because if we just say, oh yeah, but like in this context, it sounds like this, but in the other pairing, it sounds like this. It's so much easier for me to just say it's this one. And it's just this funky backwards upside down E. That's the sound. And then we have like E and I, and then A and E, and then like and aw.
I tell people, like, I was like, I love the dictionary so much because I actually tell people this is one of my secrets, is that like, if you really want to understand a language the way that somebody who is native understands it, you need to study with the dictionary. You don't study with the translations, because when you study with the translations, you just translate. But there are so many words that have they're the same translation, sound very similar, but they have different meanings. Like I always tell people, it's kind of a heavy word, but in English, when we talk about like abuse of power or abuse of something else, that word in English is not. Obviously it's negative, and it kind of means the same thing, but we use it in a way that's not as heavy as it is in Portuguese.
Really? Because I find mine the opposite, actually. And a lot of where I am in Bahia, they'll be like, oh, que abuso. And it'll be like, it's like, oh, stop messing with me, dude. Like, stop. Like, oh, you're like, it's like that. That's it. And so when my husband, he was like, he'd said something in some context, oh, que abuso. And I was like, oh my God.
I would say that might be something from Bahia, because
from Bahia,
São Paulo and like, in here in Curitiba, for example, we're talking about dogs, right? And how here in Brazil, dogs have more rights than they do. And I was talking about how somebody abused a dog, and they were like, everybody just started freaking out because they were like, what did you? I was like, because they were thinking of abuse in a sexual way, not
like maltrato.
Not in the way that we think of it.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, I clarify, I'm like, look, in English, when we use it, we specifically just mean,
physical
abuse of aggression, that kind of thing. It's usually something towards, not doing something more than what you're supposed to, if that makes sense. And
say abuse of power is the same.
Yeah,
abuse of power, abuse of sugar abuse.
Exactly. You in English, you can do that a lot, but here, if you use the wrong word in the wrong context, and make a big, and I'm sure that happens in Spanish and French and all these other languages. But I always tell people that learning the dictionary is going to be the best way for you to understand how people see, how people hear the words that you speak. Like, it may take you 15 minutes to learn one word, but in the process of learning one word, you're going to learn 15 or 20 other ones to help you be able to describe that. And once you understand the meaning of words, then you're able to more communicate at a higher capacity.
Yeah.
Instead of using the same word over and over again, you can see other words that will help you.
I think the hardest thing when we look at that, though, too, is when we look at using the dictionary. I feel like there's kind of two different directions you can go with that. I would say learning the dictionary is probably one of the best ways when we're looking at reading format. But it's one of the hardest when it comes to, unless you know how to use IPA, like in the written forms inside of the alphabet. We have a lot of these things where I have a lot of students that are super, super, super intelligent in English in the written form, but they have serious difficulty speaking and using it in day-to-day context because they are scientists or researchers or business people that had to read medical articles or studies and things like that, where they're very strong in their reading, in their reading ability. Like even my sister-in-law, she's going to be a dentist and she reads a ton, but sometimes in the spoken, she's very shy.
Yep.
But her reading capacity is huge. And so I think within some context, that's an incredible resource. But if we don't pair that with some sort of speech, it can create some difficulty, where I think in Spanish, for example, it's less so, because I think Spanish is probably the best of the three when it comes to what it looks like versus how it sounds.
Maybe.
It's the closest. Like, is just but like in Portuguese, vontade should be vontade, and it's not. It's vontade or vontade or whatever, depending on your accent.
The R has 3 different sounds as well.
Yeah. It's like, what, who? And like in Spanish,
I love it when people are like, oh, it sounds like the R in Portuguese. And I was like, well, I mean, which R? There's different, it's,
Well, and I love your Curitiba R as well, because in the north, I say the north, like it's one place, it's massive, but like in Bahia in particular, as you go in certain areas, like the rare is not a thing. It's most of my job is teaching people how to rare versus the h sound, which really comes out.
I don't know if you saw, I posted.
I did a pill, the R pill.
Yeah.
I swear it. When I told you I was watching your reels, I was sitting there like, wait, that's good. That's good. That's good. I liked all of them. But then I started to laugh out of nowhere. And my husband was like, what is so funny? It's like, R pills. It
was creative because I have students who, we'll talk about a word and I'll say, no, it's, remember, right? Remember. And then they'll be like, okay.
Hey, maybe.
Remember. Yeah. We're so close. And so I'm going to invent an imaginary medicine that's going to help people remember that the R is R always in English.
Rare.
Yeah, it's crazy. But do you have any, like, so you were talking about how, for example, I talked about my secret of the dictionary.
Yeah.
And I think what you said, it makes perfect sense. Like I always recommend people use the dictionary more towards, like, once they have a good base in English, then the dictionary. But do you have like a tip that you usually share with people that isn't like super secret about how to learn pronunciation?
But a secret. Oh man, with pronunciation, I think for me, one of the things that I have found is that I do it a lot backwards. Like, I learned how to analyze my accent because of learning Portuguese. Because like I said, in Spanish, you kind of have certain rules and certain sounds, and I just I study the people around me. So with Portuguese, for me, I noticed certain sounds and certain patterns in the written form versus the spoken form. And so in English, I would say choose an accent, because a rule that I say is a rule in English is usually it's in American English. So like the rare sound that you said in English all the time, it's always a rare. That's actually not true when we start to look at other countries and other accents, where it's like water versus water. Like, why do we do water? I don't know. And it's not that hard, right? I'm overdoing it to make it obvious, but I think I love the idea of looking at an accent like music.
Yeah.
I love songs, actually. I think listening to music is an interesting way to do it, because you see how we modify sound, because I separate my pronunciation from the letters, really.
I
Like,
need to. I don't. I always
yeah,
tell my students, I'm like, all right, close your eyes, listen to how I say it.
yeah.
And then they repeat it. And I'm like, and then, they repeat the sound and it sounds perfect. And then you're like, okay, open your eyes. Now say the same
Exactly.
thing you just told me. And then,
And their brain breaks.
but they're trying to read it and think about it. And it's like,
Exactly.
I created a rule with one of my students, and she didn't like it at first, but it started to help later. I said, I will not show you how to write the word until you pronounce the word correctly.
Yeah.
And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to,
Yeah.
because the thing is because I would tell her how to pronounce it, she would pronounce it, and then I would write it and she would change the pronunciation based off of how she read it. And so I said, we can't do that. We have to kind of separate. And I always tell people, I was like, English is really annoying because
It's so dumb.
just like you said, like, everything that we teach as Americans is wrong in a different country. You go to England, you go to Australia. I mean, the grammar rules are pretty much the same. I mean, there's some differences. You can obviously, if you speak American English, you'll understand and speak in other places.
Sure.
But when it comes to pronunciation, people are always, how do I pronounce this? And I like to always tell people that there's a difference between grammar and accent, because
I say pronunciation and accent are they're cousins, but they're not siblings, because there's a fine line between what is the pronunciation, what's the accent.
Exactly. Well, that's what I tell people. I was like, look, if I can understand you, and if somebody normal can understand what you're saying, it's an accent. Whereas if you're changing the word, and you're saying something different, then it becomes a grammar pronunciation problem.
My Spanish teacher in high school, she's incredible. Señora Guillen, I loved her. And she always said, you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. It's like,
that's true.
The emphasis on the wrong syllable. And you're like, ew, that sounds gross. And she's like, that's what I'm talking about. So in Spanish, you have este and este. And it's the same in English. So that's pronunciation. That's pronunciation. That's not accent. That's
right.
Like legit, the word changes.
Exactly.
So it's the emphasis on the syllable. It's like,
definitely. No, I agree.
Good one. Mm-hmm.
But we're getting close to the end of our time. But
okay.
do you have anything that you want to say, or any questions for me or anything?
Oh, I guess I'm curious. When you teach English, do you work only with Brazilians?
That's a good question.
Because sometimes my tips will vary depending on what language the person is coming from.
I've worked with Brazilians and I've worked with Angolans.
Oh, cool.
And Portuguese people as well.
Uh-huh.
I think really anywhere that speaks Portuguese, that they tend to interact more with my content, especially since my content is a lot more heavy on Portuguese. It's a lot more heavy on Portuguese than just English. Because I think that's something I told you that I really liked about yours, is that it was so, like, there's Portuguese there, but there's a lot of English as well. And so it's kind of easy for other people to. And sometimes I get people who speak Spanish, but I've never had a student that spoke Spanish and wanted me to teach them English, because that would be difficult. But I mean, it would be a challenge and it would be fun. I learned some Spanish, but it's the whole, I can communicate if I have to, but if I don't need to, I will not speak Spanish.
I think the piece for me when I'm looking at resources, I think it's something where find a teacher or look for a situation where they will meet you where you're at. Because I think, so like, I have a student, I've been with her forever. She's from Finland. And the tips that she needs is very different than my Hungarian student or my, all over Brazil. It depends on where they're from. That accent will modify. So it's just like, when we're looking at pronunciation particularly, treat yourself like you're a 2-year-old. I said this in another podcast where it was like, when I was learning Portuguese, I said, okay, I know nothing. I am just going to absorb the information around me and I'm going to try to imitate it like a 2-year-old does. Like a friend of mine, his son is almost 2. And what does he do all day? I say, vontade. He goes, vontade. Like, it sounds silly, but what he's doing is he's learning the sounds and the connection to making your mouth be able to reproduce what the other person is saying. And sometimes when you're doing it, you can't figure that out. So I encourage people to record themselves.
Oh,
record yourself.
I tell people that all the time.
All the time. Yeah. Record yourself. And it sounds dumb. It sounds silly. Like, I do social media, so I listen to my voice all the time, every day. Like, when I'm editing, I get tired of my own voice.
I hate it.
But like, to a certain degree, it's been interesting because listening to myself say things over and over and over again, I've been able to go, oh, I do that all the time. I make that sound all the time, so that listening to a person that you like, or listening to a show that you like, and then picking those sounds, try to separate them out, and then try to reproduce them on your own. Because I think, like, otherwise I'd say get a tutor, right? Get someone that can work with you and can teach you and give you tips. But I think a lot of people, financially, that's not as possible, or time-wise, it's not. So I agree just using the things around you. Yeah. Like, I'm a very strong proponent of I look at language like music. So I don't, like, if you want me to write a whole paper in Portuguese, I probably can't. Like, I can, but I can't. Like, it's not going to be grammatically correct because I never really read Portuguese. So I feel very weird sometimes when it comes to people are like, oh my God, teach my husband Portuguese or whatever. I'm like, you don't want me to do that. You don't want me to do that.
I'm not good at that.
I'm not good at that. You don't trust, no, don't trust me. No. But it's that. So it's, you have the written form and you have the sound form, and like, you can bring them together, but don't try to make them make sense together.
Right.
Because if you try to make them make sense, you have to learn all of the rules of English. And that comes down to, like, based on this E mixed with this and the influence of French, you will get this. Like, it just becomes painful.
Yeah, it's not.
Don't.
You try.
Well, it's okay.
I agree with you. I think. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh God, please.
No,
I can talk way too long.
No, I loved it. I loved exactly what you said. I think that that's actually something I tell my students to do. I said, if you can record a video every week and send me that video, and we're actually gonna. I have a little folder in my drive where I keep all of my students' videos.
I love that.
So that we can compare them. And also because sometimes you have that student that's been with you for like 6 months, for a year, and they're like, I just don't feel like I'm getting better. And you're like, if you could hear yourself now versus where you were a year ago, it's a lot better. And also, if you could see how you interacted with me versus how you interact now, it's night and day, right? It's something so much different, so crazy that
when you don't feel it when you're in the moment, you feel like
it's like when you get married and you get bigger, like you don't realize it, right? You don't realize that your husband gained a couple pounds, and you didn't realize that you did either, because you're together all the time, every day. You see each other always, and so like you both look the same as you did since the first time you met each other. Yeah. And then that's why whenever you're away from somebody for so long and you come back and see them, you're like, oh, wow, that's different. I
forget how tall my husband is when I go away for a long time. And then I come home and I'm like, and I know he's tall. But like when I go to give him a hug, I'm like, oh, wait, you're really tall, which is so funny because I must just have like short-term memory loss. But it's I come home and I'm like,
it's super normal. It's the same thing happens. Yeah. I had a student who she did classes with me for a little while, and she had to stop. And then she came back after like a year. Like 2 years. She was living in the United States and everything. So she was working hard on it. She came back and like her whole class was in English. And I was like, you're so much better. And she's like, I don't really know. And I'm like, oh, well, I do, because I was like, sometimes you need somebody to look at it from the outside, right? It's like the same with I don't know, with just understanding the world. And that was something we were going to talk about as well. But like, just understanding the language opens your vision to how you understand the world. I think you get to understand it just a little bit more, and you get to see, for example, I don't know about you, but when you grow up in the United States, you kind of grow up with that mentality of like, America is the best. We love
Well,
America.
especially us Midwesterners.
Yeah, because we're in the heart, right? We're there. That there's nobody to come in and tell us. Nobody wants to go to St. Louis. I always tell people that nobody wants to go there and talk to us about.
It's fun. I've been a
things.
ton. I like St. Louis.
Yeah, no, it's fun. You have something you have to do there, but it's not fun just to visit. Like nobody's like, we're going on vacation to St. Louis.
Hey, at least you have the arch.
Yeah,
you have the arch.
It.
I don't have the arch. I have a river.
After 2 hours, then it's over. And then you come
back.
But yeah, so like it, I remember that, and I went to São Paulo, and I learned a lot about Brazil. I learned about things that I love about Brazilian culture, things that I don't love, and I also learned about my culture and how much I appreciate it. But I also think that there are things that could be different, and so. I always tell people, because people, I don't know if you've had this question before, but people always ask you, which is better, the United States or Brazil?
Yeah, and I never give a straight answer.
My answer, I always tell people, I say, well, let me tell you this. You're asking me to choose between my home, where I grew up, where I lived, and a place that I have been maybe 5 years. I don't know everything about. So I'll probably tell you the United States because that's home.
Yeah.
But I know plenty of Brazilians that have been in the United States for a long time, and if you ask them which is better, they'll say Brazil.
Yeah.
So, and then it comes down to what do you believe, politically and all these other things that because they're both similar and very different at the same time. So
yeah,
I think that
I think the sense of community can be very specific to where you grew up as well.
Yeah.
Because I think like the Midwest, we have a certain sense of community. I think it's not as intense as at least here in Bahia. There's an incredible sense of community and connection that I think in my area, it was nice, but I didn't really get the variety of people that I get here. Just because I grew up and everybody looked like me, everybody believed the way that I believed. Like I really didn't have a lot of variety growing up. And so it was... I appreciate the fact that people...
There's like more diversity.
Yeah, well, and I think like, but mine's also weird, like without giving a really long answer, like I've lived in 3 different countries. And so I've been subject to 3 different cultures and 3 different languages and to a certain degree, 3 different, not religions, but like interpretations of ethics, maybe. What is right and what is wrong is... don't kill people, right? But like
that's usually pretty
that's usually pretty good, yeah. Like, but I feel like that's something that was interesting too. Is like I no longer can compare, them the way that I could. I think when you really get to know a place, when you get to know the people, you're able to separate. We're like, okay, yeah, some of the things that we may have issues with could be things around, certain. Lines of thought.
Yeah.
But I feel like in the end I can still be like my parents from the Midwest have the same issues and the same things that like my father-in-law does. My father-in-law still complains about the same things that my dad does. Like it's the same stuff. It's just a different language and he's sitting in a different house.
I always tell people, I'm like, look, the problems of humanity have been the same forever. Like they just change platforms, change ways of communicating, change language, Well,
and sometimes it's easier to fix things depending on where you live. Like sure, there could be answers that are different, like the struggles
people always complain about what, right? They don't like the government, they don't like paying taxes, they don't make enough money. I
was thinking even something as simple as like I'm getting older, my knees don't work as well.
Right
even just like the human things as well, just like or like I have nothing in the kitchen, gosh dang it, like I don't want to cook today, what do you want to get? Like it's the same stuff.
It's all the same. It's just just different places. And I like what you said, the older, I guess the more you understand, the more you realize that you can't compare things. It's like when people ask me my opinion on things, I used to always be like, well, this is better or this is not. But now when I tell people things, I'm like, look, this is how I think of it. This is how I see it. But I always tell people that you need to experience it yourself.
It's a lived experience.
Yeah. I was like, if people say, well, did they really do this in the United States? And I'll say, in my experience, no.
Yeah.
But if you go there and you live there, then you can kind of create your own thing. Or like people, even, I hate to say it, but even when people ask you like, oh, do you know this person? Do you like this person? I'll be like, I didn't really get along with them, but, maybe you will. And so
Well, I love the phrase "we didn't click."
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. We didn't
When
click.
and the thing about the I think I use the word broad brush a lot too. Like
Blood brush.
use a broad brush. You paint with a broad brush. It's just like, because my people around me will be like, oh, well, in Brazil, do they do this? And I could be like, you want me to answer for the whole country?
Right.
I can't. I can't do that. Or like in America, which I think it's a whole other conversation. But like in America, it's like this. And I'm like,
I get
your point of reference on that one, because the thing is I'm not invalidating it. There's no invalid experience. Like, you lived what you lived, and it's totally cool.
Yeah.
But I think we have an ability to broad brush, where it's like, oh, the United States is like this. I'm like, that's literally baloney.
Maybe some people, but not. That's kind of what I tell people. I'm like, well, because I get defensive. I wouldn't say I get offended, but I get defensive when people try to say, well, Americans are all like this.
Yeah.
I also get defensive when people say all Brazilians are like
this.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
because the thing is I'm like, look, for example, when people are like, oh, Americans are all cold, right? They don't like to hug. They don't I'm like, that's not true.
No.
I know so many people, but here's the thing. Where do you go? Most of the time when people go and visit the States, they go to cities, and cities are very busy. And
and they also haven't interacted with the people. Like, usually when we talk about being warm and open and stuff, I think maybe Americans, if we were to be super, super general about it, sure, maybe we're not as warm and fuzzy at a restaurant. Like, you're not going to be welcomed like a family member to a restaurant, but it also depends on the restaurant. It depends on the area. It depends on who you went with.
Go down south or go up northeast, right?
Sure, exactly. So we look at that idea of hospitality, but that's a different question of warmth, right?
Exactly.
It's different. It's built in.
I tell people as well, like, well, something that I think also is interesting is that, like, here it's expected, like people, they expect you to kind of be open, and if you talk with somebody, you kind of expect them to answer. And
oh my God, you're so rude if you don't, which is
exactly.
At least where I'm from, it's like, if you don't saludar todo mundo, you're done. You're like,
yeah, exactly.
You have to say hello to everyone, give everyone a hug. But like in the US, you walk in the room and you're like, hi, and like that counts.
They're like, okay.
So there's that where it's like, okay, the cold, I get it, where maybe cold comes from that stuff, but it's like, well, it's different.
Right, and I tell people, and it's like, for us, I think I wouldn't say all, but a lot of Americans have this internal thing of, I don't want to bother that person. I don't want to, like, I don't want to do anything that's going to make that person angry. So I'm not going to talk to them. We have that separation because we just don't want to interfere with each other's lives. Yeah. And in Brazil,
I think we're also very polite. We do that, I'm sorry, especially in the Midwest, where like, if you even touch someone slightly on accident on the arm at a grocery store, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's like,
exactly.
In Portuguese,
you like bump into someone, you're like, oh, hey, how are you? How's everything going? Right?
Exactly.
And so like here, it's not seen as a interference. It's seen more of just like,
we're just interacting together.
We're just talking. So, it's interesting.
I like that.
But we'll have to talk more about it.
Yeah, that's cool.
I really enjoyed our conversation. I enjoyed getting to know you more. And do you have any last comments before we end it?
I would say if you haven't followed me or Samuel, you should, because I think that we both have very different perspectives, but they're both super interesting and helpful, and kind of will continue upon what we were talking about, where like you get to see the differences in the ways that people interpret and how we teach and how you do that. And if you don't want to follow us, that's cool too, but like find someone that inspires you and find someone that you like, and kind of just stay inspired and stay curious, because I know it can be frustrating, but just keep going and find something that excites you, because if you find something in English that excites you, you'll want to learn it more.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Well, we'll end it on that comment. Thank you very much, Ian, for everything.
Thank you.
And everybody stay safe and have a great week until next time in Bled Talk. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Bled Talk. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content. We are on all of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we're even on YouTube. Don't forget to send in your questions and your suggestions. Thank you once again, and have a great day.